The automatic doors of First Continental Bank slid open at exactly 10:14 on a Tuesday morning, and the cold rush of air-conditioned air hit Ruth Ann Calloway like a wall she hadn't been invited to cross. She stepped inside anyway. Her boots, brown leather Wolverines, she'd resoled twice since buying them in 2011, left faint traces of red. Kentucky clay on the polished marble floor with every step. She noticed it immediately. She always noticed things like that. 40 years of farming had trained her eyes to track what didn't belong, what was out of place, what needed tending. Right now, in the pristine lobby of First Continental Bank's Lexington branch, the thing that didn't belong was her. Ruth Ann Calloway was 58 years old, 5'4", and built the way honest work builds a person, not soft, not sharp, just solid. Her hands told the whole story before her mouth ever opened. Knuckles thickened from winter's gripping fence wire, palms lined with a kind of permanent creases that no amount of lotion ever smooths out. 2 fingernails on her right hand permanently discolored from a hay baler incident in 2019. She wore her silver-streaked brown hair pulled back in a practical bun. No earrings, no makeup beyond the faint pink of windburn across her cheekbones. Her jacket was a Carhartt canvas barn coat, faded to a dusty brown, with a small tear at the left elbow she'd mended with iron-on patch stoppie. Her jeans were clean. She'd changed out of her field clothes before driving into the city. But they were working jeans, straight cut and worn pale at both knees. The only thing about her that looked remotely formal was the small leather wallet she carried in her left hand, the kind that folded in thirds and snapped shut with a brass button. She stood in the entrance for a moment, getting her bearings. The branch was larger than the one she used to visit in Harlan, back when First Continental still had a location there. They'd closed it 3 years ago. Efficiency, consolidation, the letter had said, as if driving 94 miles round trip was an efficient use of a farmer's Tuesday morning. The lobby had that particular kind of silence that expensive places cultivate, not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of performance. Hushed voices, the soft percussion of keyboards, a fountain in the corner that served no purpose except to make the air sound busy. 2 tellers behind a long mahogany counter, both in their 20s, both wearing the bank's branded navy blazers. A waiting area with leather chairs that probably cost more than Ruth Ann's first truck. Large framed prints on the walls showing fields and open skies, the bank's way of telling rural clients, "We understand you," while making sure everything about the physical space communicated the opposite. Ruth Ann walked to the teller line. There was one person ahead of her, a middle-aged man in a golf shirt depositing what looked like a business check. She weighted weight on her left foot, the way she always stood when her right hip was bothering her, which it had been since Monday when she'd spent 6 hours walking the east fence line checking for storm damage. The teller who called her forward was a young woman with a high ponytail and a name tag that read Cassidy. "Good morning," Cassidy said, with the automatic warmth of someone trained to project it, regardless of what they actually felt. "How can I help you today?" "Morning," Ruth Ann said. Her voice was unhurried, low, the kind of voice that had spent decades giving instructions to people and animals without needing to raise itself. "I just need to check my balance. The ATM out front gave me an error message. Wouldn't read my card? Oh, I'm sorry about that. We've been having some intermittent issues with the exterior ATM this week." Cassidy was already reaching for her keyboard. "Can I have your account number or your debit card?" Ruth Ann unsnapped her wallet and slid her card across the counter. Cassidy took it, typed something, waited. "And can I verify your full name and the last 4 of your social?" "Ruth Ann Calloway social ends in 4471. Cassidy typed again, looked at the screen. Typed something else. A small expression crossed her face. Not alarm exactly, more like the particular alertness of someone seeing something that requires a supervisor. She recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. "One moment, Ms. Calloway, I'm going to need to have our branch manager assist you with this." Ruth Ann looked at her steadily. "Is there a problem with my account?" No problem at all," Cassidy said. The warmth in her voice had shifted slightly. Still professional, but layered now with something more careful. It's just that for accounts of this, for certain account types, we like to have a manager available. Just one moment. She picked up the phone on her desk, turned slightly away, and spoke quietly into it. Ruth Ann waited. She was good at waiting. Farming was mostly waiting. Waiting for rain, waiting for the ground to warm, waiting for prices to move, waiting for banks to process loan applications, waiting for government programs to release funds, waiting for the season to turn. Patience wasn't a virtue she'd cultivated so much as a survival skill she'd had no choice but to develop. She looked around the lobby while she stood there, noticed a young couple at a desk near the window, talking to an advisor about what looked like a mortgage application. She could see the house brochures spread out between them, noticed the security guard near the door, a heavy-set man in his 50s who'd glanced at her boots when she came in, noticed the small camera mounted at the corner of the teller counter, its red light blinking steadily. She heard the footsteps before she saw him, the particular cadence of a man who'd learned to walk as if his arrivals were events. Preston Aldridge had been the Lexington branch manager of First Continental Bank for 7 years, and in those 7 years he had constructed his professional identity with the same deliberate care that architects apply to. Buildings designed to impress. He was 44 years old, lean in the way of men who use a gym more for discipline than health, with dark hair going silver at the temples. In a way he privately considered distinguished, he wore his suits always charcoal or navy, always tailored with the ease of a man who had made peace with the cost. He had grown up in Louisville, the son of a mid-level insurance executive, and had attended the University of Kentucky on an academic scholarship, graduating with a finance degree and the unshakable conviction that the difference between the people behind the counter and the people in front of it was intelligence. It was a belief system that his career had done nothing to challenge, because he had always been careful to surround himself with data that confirmed it. He rounded the corner from his office hallway and took in the woman at teller 3 with the practiced efficiency of someone who processed people visually before engaging with them verbally. Mud-tracked boots, Carhartt coat, no jewelry, drove here from somewhere far enough that it required actual planning to come in. Account flagged 4, manager review, which happened for 2 reasons at this branch. Potential fraud, or to high-value accounts that corporate protocol required a senior employee to handle directly. He looked at her hands, looked at her coat, made his assessment in approximately 3 seconds. Fraud check. Then, probably someone who'd inherited an account from a deceased family member and was trying to access it without proper documentation. He'd dealt with it before. Rural families, elderly relatives, unclear estate situations. He'd learned to handle these interactions with a particular tone, firm but gentle, the way you'd speak to someone who didn't fully understand the rules but wasn't necessarily malicious. He extended his hand as he approached. "Good morning. I'm Preston Aldridge, branch manager. You're Miss Calloway?" "That's right." Ruth Ann shook his hand once, firmly. Her grip was considerably stronger than he'd expected, and he registered it without showing it. "Why don't we step over to my office?" "More comfortable than standing at the counter. I just need my balance," Ruth Ann said, not impatiently, not rudely. Simply, as a person states a simple fact. "The girl said you needed to assist with certain account types. I'd like to know what type my account is and what my balance is. That's all I came for." Preston smiled. It was the smile he used for complicated conversations, pleasant on the surface, with a layer of authority just underneath, like a hand resting on a door to make clear it wasn't going to open further. Of course. We just want to make sure we give you the right service. Shall we?" He gestured toward the office. Ruth Ann considered the gesture for a moment, then walked in the direction he'd indicated. His office was a glass-walled rectangle off the main lobby floor, furnished with a heavy oak desk, 2 chairs for clients upholstered in burgundy leather, and a credenza behind him bearing 2 framed photos, one of a ski trip, one of a corporate awards dinner, and a small model of the bank's headquarters building in Columbus, Ohio, made of brass. Ruth Ann sat down. She set her wallet on her knee and looked at him directly. Preston sat behind the desk, clicked his mouse, brought up the account screen. He was already composing the conversation in his head. He'd need to ask for documentation, probably a death certificate if it was an estate situation, or a power of attorney. He'd be patient with her. He'd explain the process. He was practiced at explaining processes to people who were unfamiliar with institutional procedures. He typed in the account number Cassidy had noted. Hit enter, the screen loaded. Preston Aldridge read the number on his screen. Then he read it again. The smile. The automatic, managerial, I'm in control of this conversation smile did not vanish all at once. It faded in stages, the way a light dims when a power line is slowly losing current. First, the warmth went. Then the expression fell into something that had no name in his professional vocabulary because he had never needed a word for it before. He looked up at Ruth Ann Calloway, who was watching him with the unhurried patience of someone who had seen this exact reaction before and had simply been waiting for it. "I'd like to know my balance," she said again. "Please." Outside, the Kentucky morning was warming towards 70 degrees. A maintenance worker was cleaning the exterior ATM with a cloth and a spray bottle. A pigeon walked along the edge of the fountain near the parking lot entrance with the determined purposefulness of a creature who owned the place. Ruth Ann's truck, a 2009 Ford F250, rusted along the wheel wells, a crack running diagonally across the lower right corner of the windshield. She'd been meaning to get fixed since January sat in a visitor parking spot 3 spaces from the door. On the back seat, in a paper bag from a gas station in Richmond, was her lunch. A ham sandwich she'd made at 4 in the morning before going out to check on the cattle. 2 navel oranges and a bottle of water. She had left the farm at 6:45 a.m. She had told her farmhand, a 23-year-old named Devin, to check the drainage on the south field and to call her if the water pump in the barn started making the sound again. She had not told anyone she was coming to the bank. She had not told anyone about the letter. 3 weeks earlier, Ruth Ann had been sitting at the kitchen table in the farmhouse at 8:47 p.m., doing what she did every Sunday evening, going through the week's paperwork. The kitchen table was the command center of the Calloway farm operation, not because there was no office. There was technically a small room off the hallway that her late husband Dale had called the office, furnished with a metal filing cabinet and a desktop computer that ran Windows 7 and connected to the internet through a satellite dish on the roof that cost $140 a month. But because Ruth Ann had always found it easier to think at the kitchen table, under the overhead light, with a cup of coffee she'd stopped tasting an hour ago going cold beside her. The week's paperwork was a particular kind of archaeology seed a bill from the equipment repair shop in Harlan for the work they'd done on the tractor's hydraulic system, a property tax notice paid, filed, documented with a copy stapled behind it, a letter from the USDA about a crop insurance adjustment. And, at the bottom of the stack, an envelope from First Continental Bank, Lexington branch, that she'd set aside Monday morning because she'd been in the middle of dealing with a sick calf and hadn't had the mental space for it. She opened it now. It was 2 pages. The first was a standard account summary header, account number, her name and address, the branch contact information. The second page was the substance of it, and she read it 3 times before she set it down. The letter informed her that, per First Continental Bank's revised policy on Tier 1, private asset account, a designation she'd never heard, her account had been flagged for a mandatory in-person verification review. This was, the letter explained with considerable bureaucratic delicacy, a routine measure applied to accounts meeting certain criteria, designed to ensure account security and to provide the account holder with an opportunity to review available financial services appropriate to their account status. In plain language, they wanted her to come in. Ruth Ann had held the letter for a while, reading the phrase, Tier 1 private asset account again. Then she'd gone to the office and turned on the old desktop computer, wading through its laborious startup process, and looked up what that designation meant. She'd found it. She'd read the definition. She'd sat with it for a moment. Then she'd gone back to the kitchen, poured the cold coffee down the sink, made a fresh cup, and finished the rest of her paperwork. The account in question had not started as hers. It had started as her father-in-law, Howard Callaway Dale's father, Ruth Phan's father, a man she had known for 31 years. Before his death in 2019, had been a farmer too, third generation, working land in Harlan County that his grandfather had broken and his father had expanded. Howard had been, by any external measure, indistinguishable from every other struggling Kentucky tobacco and soybean farmer of his generation, weathered, taciturn, distrustful of banks, distrustful of government programs, distrustful of most things that hadn't proven themselves to him personally through direct experience. What almost no one knew, what even Dale had not known in its full extent until he was in his late 40s, was that Howard Callaway had also been, over the course of 50 years of farming, extraordinarily disciplined about money, not educated about money, not sophisticated about money in the way financial advisors meant when they used that word. Disciplined? Howard had grown up during the tail end of the Great Depression as a young child, raised by a father who'd survived it, and he had internalized two truths that he never spoke aloud, but never deviated from. You spend less than you make, and you put something away every single time without exception. He had opened an account with First Continental's predecessor bank, Harlan County Savings and Trust, acquired by First Continental in 1987 and 1961. When he was 22 years old, he had deposited into it every month for the next 58 years. Not large amounts, usually, sometimes, very small amounts in lean years. But every month, without exception, he had put something into that account and he had never taken anything out of it. He had also, through a combination of a financial advisor he'd used briefly in the 1980s, who talked him into a diversified index portfolio, and the sheer compounding arithmetic of 58 years of consistent contribution and reinvestment, accumulated a sum that would have been genuinely difficult to explain to anyone who only knew Howard Callaway as the quiet old farmer in the worn overalls who bought his coffee black and his lunch meat on sale. When Howard died in February 2019, at 80 years old, he left the farm equally to Dale and Dale's brother, Russell. He left the account, the full account, solely and completely, with new division to Ruth Ann. Not to Dale, not to the farm, to Ruth Ann, specifically, by name, in a handwritten amendment to his will that his lawyer had filed correctly, and that had been, to Ruth Ann's private astonishment, when the lawyer read it to her 3 weeks after the funeral, entirely unambiguous. She had asked the lawyer, a woman named Patricia Hensley, who'd practiced in Harlan for 30 years, why. Patricia had handed her a sealed envelope with her name on it in Howard's handwriting. Inside was a single index card. Howard had never been a man of many words. It read, "You stayed. You worked. You held it together when it needed holding. Dolly's like me. He'd spend it on the land. The land doesn't need more money. You do. Don't let anyone tell you different." Ruth Ann had read the card in Patricia's office, folded it back into the envelope, and put it in her coat pocket. She had not cried until she was in her truck, 3 blocks away, parked behind the Dollar General. Dale had died 8 months after Howard, in October 2019. A heart attack, the second one, the one his cardiologist had told him 2 years earlier was coming if he didn't change what he refused to change. He was sick. They had been married 32 years. Ruth Ann had buried her father-in-law and her husband in the same calendar year, on the same piece of land they'd worked together, and then she had kept farming. She had not told anyone about the account, not Russell, who'd gotten his half of the farm and sold it within a year to a corporate agricultural operation out of Cincinnati, not her daughter, Claire, who lived in Nashville and called on Sundays and had enough of her own financial complexity to navigate. Not Devin, her farmhand, who was a good worker and a trustworthy kid, but who didn't need to know. She'd transferred the account to the Lexington branch after the Harlan location closed, and since then she had neither withdrawn from it nor contributed to it, because Howard had made clear the investment portfolio was to be left alone to do what it did. And Huchian. who did not pretend to understand investment portfolios and their mechanics but understood the principle of leaving something alone when it was working, had left it alone. In the 5 years since Dale's death, the account had continued to do what it had always done. Now, sitting across from Preston Aldridge in his glass-walled office, Ruth Ann watched the man recalibrate himself in real time. It was not a dramatic process. He was a professional, and professionals in his position learned to manage their reactions as a core job function. But Ruth Ann had spent her adult life reading animals and weather and machinery and the human beings who worked around her, and she could see it clearly. The reorientation happening behind his eyes as the number on his screen rearranged his understanding of who was sitting across from him. "Ms. Calloway," Preston said. His voice had changed. Not softer. Exactly. More careful. The difference between someone walking on firm ground and someone who has just realized the surface beneath them has changed composition. I want to first say that your account is, of course, completely in order. No issues whatsoever. Good, Ruth Ann said, and I want to welcome you properly to First Continental's Tier 1 Private Asset Program. I'm not sure if you've been in contact with our Wealth Management Division previously. I haven't, Ruth Ann said. I just want my balance. A B. Of course. He turned the monitor slightly toward her. As you can see, Ruth Ann leaned forward and looked at the screen. She read the number. She sat back. She had known the number, approximately, because she had done the math herself the previous Sunday evening. Using the account statements she'd kept in the filing cabinet and a calculator app on the tablet her daughter had given her for Christmas. But knowing a number you've calculated yourself and seeing it confirmed on an official bank screen were two different things. She had discovered, and she permitted herself exactly 3 seconds of sitting quietly with the fact of it before she looked back at Preston Aldridge. That's correct, she said. Yes, Preston said. Yes, it is. He was looking at her with an expression she recognized from encounters of a different kind. The specific look of a person who has underestimated something significantly and is now performing the internal arithmetic of that underestimation. She'd seen it on the faces of equipment salesmen who directed their pitch to Devon instead of her. She'd seen it on the face of a loan officer in 2021 who'd handed her the wrong application form, the one for small farm assistance programs, without asking what she needed. She'd seen it on the face of Dale's brother Russell at the will reading. When Patricia Hensley had read aloud the section about the account, she had learned not to need anything from that look. Not an apology, not a correction, not an acknowledgement. She'd learned simply to let people rearrange themselves and then proceed to the business at hand. Now, Ruth Ann said, folding her hands in her lap, since I'm here, you said something about financial services appropriate to my account. What does that mean? Exactly! Preston Aldridge straightened slightly in his chair. In the lobby beyond the glass wall, Cassidy had resumed her normal work, though Ruth Ann noticed she did not look in the direction of the manager's office. It means, Preston said, that we have a team of advisors specifically for clients for clients with accounts at this level, portfolio management, estate planning, tax strategy, philanthropic services. If that's of interest, how much does your portfolio management cost? He told her. Ruth Ann listened. She asked 3 specific questions about fee structures, about investment discretion, about withdrawal protocols. Her questions were precise and sequential, the questions of someone who had read the relevant sections of something before arriving, which she had spent 2 evenings with a yellow legal pad researching exactly what Tier 1 private asset clients were typically offered, what the standard industry fees were, and what questions a person in her position should ask. Preston answered her questions with increasing attentiveness. The careful tone was still there, but the condescension had gone out of it, not replaced by warmth. Exactly, but by something more like the focused courtesy of a professional who has correctly recalibrated the expertise level of the person across from him. When they finished, Ruth Ann stood, snapped her wallet closed, and extended her hand. I'll think about it, she said. I want to compare what you've offered against a few other institutions before I make any decisions. Can you put what you've described in writing? Absolutely, Preston said. He was already reaching for his card. And I want to say, Ms. Calloway, that we genuinely value your continued relationship with First Continental. If there's anything, I'll be in touch, she said. She took the card, looked at it briefly, put it in her wallet. She walked out of his office, across the marble lobby, the faint clay traces of her boots still visible on the floor near Teller 3, and through the automatic doors into the Kentucky morning. She sat in her truck for a moment before starting it, ate one of the navel oranges, looked out the windshield at the parking lot and the fountain and the maintenance worker who'd moved on from the ATM to washing, the glass panels on the front of the building. Then she started the truck and drove home. She had cattle to check on and a fence line to finish walking, and Devin had texted her twice about the water pump. The account would still be there tomorrow. It had been there for 63 years. It wasn't going anywhere. Ruth Ann Calloway had learned most of what she knew about money from watching two men who handled it badly in completely different ways. Her own father, George Mabry, had been a man of appetites, not vicious appetites. Nothing dramatic, just the ordinary human tendency to spend toward comfort and away from anxiety, to buy the thing that made the present moment better without full accounting of the future moments it was borrowing against. He'd worked as a mechanic in a small shop in Pineville, Kentucky, made a decent living by local standards, and had nothing when he died at 73 except the paid-off mortgage on a house that needed a new roof. Dale Calloway had been the opposite failure, a man who poured everything back into the land because the land was the only language he trusted, the only investment whose value he could see and touch and walk across. He'd put money into the farm when they had it and borrowed against the farm when they didn't. And the net result over 32 years was that the land was in excellent shape and their personal financial position was, by any objective measure, fragile. Ruth Ann herself had never had money that was truly hers. Not the way the account was hers now, until Howard died and Patricia Hensley read the will. She'd had joint accounts with Dale, a small life insurance payout. The farm's operating revenue, which varied year to year in ways that kept her awake more nights than she cared to count. But never a sum that was substantial enough to feel different in quality, not just quantity. The account had felt different from the first moment she understood what it contained. Not because of what it could buy, though. She'd thought about that. Of course. A new roof on the farmhouse, a better truck, the dental work she'd been putting off, college help for her daughter Claire's 2 kids when that time came. None of those things were small to her, and she was honest enough with herself to acknowledge the relief that came with knowing they were possible. But the thing that had kept her awake that first night, in a way that wasn't anxiety but something harder to name, the thing was what the account meant about how Howard Calloway had seen her. Howard had never been a man who said things. Not to her, not to Dale, not to anyone she'd ever seen. He expressed himself through work, through presence, through the small daily choices that accumulated over decades, added up the character. He'd never once told Ruth Ann he respected her. He'd never offered a compliment on her management of the farm, her handling of the hard years, the way she'd stayed and worked while other women she'd grown up with had found easier lives in cities and never looked back. He'd told her through the account. He'd told her with 58 years of monthly deposits and a handwritten index card that she kept in the leather wallet that snapped shut with a brass button. Behind a debit card, behind her driver's license, behind the photo of her and Dale taken on their 20th anniversary at a state park outside Corbin. She read it sometimes, when she needed to. Devin Marsh had worked for Ruth Ann for 3 years, starting the summer after he dropped out of Eastern Kentucky University, following his second year when his mother's medical bills had made the cost-benefit of finishing a degree feel impossible to justify against the immediate family need. He was 23, from a family in Bell County that had farmed until his grandfather's generation, and then, one by one, hadn't. And he had a practical competence with physical work and machinery that Ruth Ann had recognized immediately and paid accordingly. He also, as he had noticed, paid careful attention to everything without appearing to. He was in the barn replacing a belt on the water pump when she pulled the truck back onto the property at 1:45 p.m. "Pump's fixed," he called out when he heard her boots on the concrete. Belt was just worn. Wasn't the motor? Good, Ruth Ann said. She hung her coat on the hook inside the barn door. Southfield drainage okay. Slower than it should be. Might want to look at the secondary pipe down at the east end. I think there's something blocking it. I'll go out after lunch. She looked at what he was doing for a moment. You eat? Had something earlier. Come up to the house when you're done with that. I made soup this morning. It's on the stove. He would come. He always did on the days she cooked. Because he was 23 and lived alone in the small rental house down the road and ate a great deal of peanut, butter, and cereal when left to his own resources. Ruth Ann had fed farm workers her entire adult life. It was part of the labor compact on small farms, an arrangement older than wages, and she did it without ceremony or expectation of gratitude, the same way she did most things. She didn't tell him she'd been to the bank. She didn't tell him about the letter, or Preston Aldrich's face, or the number on the screen. She heated up the soup, ate her lunch, went out to look at the secondary drainage pipe, found the blockage, a collapsed segment about 15 feet in, which was going to require excavation and replacement. Noted it in her paperwork, called the landscaping contractor she used for infrastructure work, left a message. The afternoon became evening in the way spring afternoons do in Kentucky. The light thinning slowly, the air cooling with more intention than the day had given it credit for. The birds changing shift from sparrows to the first tentative owls. Ruth Ann sat on the porch after dinner with a cup of coffee she intended to drink while it was still hot, watching the last of the light drain out of the field to the east. She was thinking about a phone call she needed to make. Clyde E. Calloway Claire Radford now had been Radford for 8 years, married to a sound engineer named Marcus, who worked primarily in Nashville's country music recording industry. Was 31 years old and had, from the time she was approximately 14, conducted herself as if she had already arrived at conclusions about her parents' life, choices that would take the parents themselves decades longer to reach. This was not hostility. It was something more complicated. The particular clarity that children of hard-working, stoic people sometimes develop, a clarity about the cost of what they've witnessed, about what the life looked like from the outside, that the people living it couldn't fully see from the inside. Claire had left Harlan County at 18 with a scholarship to Vanderbilt, never come back to stay, visited for Thanksgiving and parts of summer, and maintained with her mother a relationship that was close in the ways that mattered. The 9 p.m. Sunday calls, the practical support during the hard years, the genuine conversation that was possible between two people who respected each other's intelligence and carefully distant in the ways that were necessary for Claire's peace of mind about the life she had chosen not to live. Ruth Ann called her on a Wednesday evening, 2 days after the visit to the bank. "Mom!" Claire answered on the second ring, the way she always did, prepared, already tracking the register of Ruth Ann's voice for information before the conversation fully began. "Hey, honey! How are the kids? Good?" Lily lost another tooth. We're now in serious tooth fairy debt. Marcus is in Atlanta for 3 days doing a session. What's going on? Ruth Ann had been sitting on the edge of the bed in the room she'd shared with Dale for 27 years. The room she'd slept in alone for 6.5 years now. And she said, without particular preamble, because she had never been a woman for preamble, "I need to tell you something about Howard's account." A small silence. "Okay," Claire said. Ruth Ann told her the full amount, the investment structure, the bank's designation. Preston Aldrich's face, which he described with a dry precision that made Claire laugh once, sharply, then stop. When she finished, there was a longer silence. "Mom," Claire said, "how long have you known?" "Since the will reading, 2019. Another silence. "You've known for 6 years. "I didn't. I wasn't sure what to do with it," Ruth Ann said. "I didn't know if it was real until I saw it on the screen." "You saw it on a bank statement before." Seeing it on a statement and seeing it on a screen in a bank office with a man like that reading it are different things. She heard Claire exhale. Heard the specific quality of that exhale? Not frustration exactly, but the exhale of someone absorbing something that requires realignment. "Okay," Claire said. "Okay. So what are you going to do? I don't know yet. That's partly why I'm telling you. Are you going to keep farming? Ruth Ann looked at the window. Outside, the yard light had come on over the barn, the way it did every night, casting the same cone of yellow light it had cast on every night of her life, here since 1993, when Dale installed it. I'm going to keep farming, she said. Okay, Claire said. Then, what do you need? And Ruth Ann said, I need someone to help me think about this properly. I don't need that man at First Continental. I need someone who's actually on my side. Preston Aldridge had made a call that same afternoon. He had, in the manner of someone processing an event that had slightly destabilized him, done what he habitually did when stability was needed. He had made a productive call and taken an action, because productivity was the language his internal life spoke when other languages failed him. The call was to Diane Forsyth, the regional director of First Continental's Wealth Management Division, based in Cincinnati. Diane, we have a client in Lexington I should have flagged sooner. The account's been sitting under review status for 6 months because the previous manager didn't catch the tier classification which he transferred in from the Harlan branch. Diane's voice had the dry efficiency of a person who handled large numbers regularly and was not easily impressed by them. But he heard the fractional shift when he told her the account value. You're telling me this account has been in standard teleservice rotation for 6 months? The Harlan branch closed. She transferred here. The classification wasn't flagged correctly in the transfer protocol. She's been using the ATM for basic transactions, a pause that contained multitudes. What did she come in for today? Balance inquiry. Another pause, Preston. I know. Get her into wealth management. I'll have Mark Ellison from our Cincinnati office contact her directly. She said she wants to compare options. Then make sure our options are worth comparing. Diane's voice was flat, but not unkind. The flatness of someone who had redirected institutional failures many times before and knew the shape of the conversation. Do we know anything about her estate structure? Family situation? 1 daughter. Adult. The account came from a family inheritance. Father-in-law. Husband is deceased. So, she's the sole stakeholder. Yes. Preston, I want a full profile document on my desk Friday. Account history, estate context, what she was offered today, what she's considering. Client retention for this account tier is a priority. Understood. He had spent the rest of Wednesday afternoon building the profile document, which required him to review the account's full history dating back to its origin at Harlan County Savings and Trust in 1961. He had read, in summary, 63 years of deposit records. He had not expected what he found. The consistency of it was, in a way, he was not entirely comfortable admitting even to himself, remarkable. Every month, 63 years, the smallest deposit on record was $11, made in March 1974, which he calculated was during the period of the National Agricultural Recession and matched with a documented crop failure year for that region. The largest monthly deposits were in the late 1990s, when markets were performing and the compound growth had started to feed on itself. There was no withdrawal. Not one. Not in 63 years. He sat with that for a moment. He had clients, wealthy clients, clients who came in with inherited portfolios and business sale proceeds and trust fund structures, who had never demonstrated that kind of discipline. Most of them had, in fact, not needed to. The account that had produced. Ruth Ann Calloway's current financial position had been built not through any particular financial sophistication, but through a consistency so absolute it had simply beaten the mathematics of time. He read the note in the file from the 1987 acquisition. Account holder declined to consolidate or diversify at acquisition, declined all outreach. Instructed staff to cease contact, continued standard scheduled contributions. Howard Calloway had wanted nothing from the bank, except for the bank to hold what he was giving it and leave him alone. Preston thought about that for a while, then he wrote his profile document and sent it to Diane. Ruth Ann's call to her daughter had produced, within 48 hours, a recommendation. Claire's neighbor in Nashville, a woman named Sandra Park, whose husband was a cardiologist, had used a fee-only fiduciary financial advisor named Gregory Haas for 8 years and had recommended him without qualification. Fee-only meant he charged a flat rate and took no commissions from any product he recommended, which was the structure Ruth Ann had identified in her research as the one that aligned an advisor's interest with a client's rather than with the investment products on offer. Gregory Haas's office was in Nashville, which meant Ruth Ann drove to Nashville on a Friday morning in her 2009 F-250 with the cracked windshield and the rust at the wheel wells. Met him at his office on a mid-level floor of a building in the Gulch neighborhood and sat across from a methodical, unshowy man of 52 who had spent his career explaining financial concepts in plain language to people who had not spent their lives thinking about finance. He did not change his posture when she told him the account value. He did not change his posture at any point in the 2-hour meeting, which she noted and respected. He asked her 4 questions before he asked anything about the account itself. What do you want your life to look like in 5 years? What do you want it to look like at 20? Who depends on you? What would you regret not doing? Ruth Ann answered each question with the same directness she brought to everything else. She wanted to keep farming, but she wanted the farm to not be a source of financial anxiety. She wanted it to be a choice she was making, not a necessity she was trapped in. She wanted her grandchildren to have options she hadn't had. She wanted the maintenance backlog on the property-handled roof, fencing, drainage infrastructure, without it requiring a loan. She wanted, eventually, a new truck. Gregory Haas had written her answers down in a legal pad. He'd looked at them. Then he'd said, "None of what you want is complicated. The numbers make it all straightforward. The only question is whether you want to remain involved in the decisions or whether you want to hand them to someone you trust and step back." "I want to remain involved," Ruth Ann said. "Good," he said. "Then here's what I'd suggest." 14 days after Ruth Ann's visit to First Continental Bank, Preston Aldridge received a letter. It was from an attorney's office in Louisville, a firm he knew by name, a firm that handled institutional accounts and high-net-worth client disputes, informing First Continental Bank that Ruth Ann Calloway would be transferring her account to a different financial institution, effective within 30 days, and requesting all account documentation, historical statements, and transfer paperwork to be prepared per standard regulatory protocol. The letter was 3 paragraphs. It was entirely correct in its legal form. It made no accusations, filed no complaints, requested nothing beyond what she was entirely entitled to request. Preston read it twice. Then he called Diane. "She's transferring out," he said. A silence. "The full account. The full account." Diane said nothing for a moment. Then, "Did we give her a reason to stay?" Preston thought about the marble floor, the mud-traced boots, the 3 seconds it had taken him to assess her, the smile that had started to fade before he'd had the chance to consciously direct it. "We gave her the standard offer," he said. "That's not what I asked." He didn't answer. Diane said, "Let her go cleanly. Full documentation. No delays. No retention attempts. Process it as priority. Understood?" "I'm Preston. Update the tier classification protocol for transferred accounts. I want to process document by end of month." Up. Preston set the phone down and looked out the glass wall of his office at the lobby floor. The marble was clean. The fountain moved. A young couple was sitting at the mortgage desk, spreading out house brochures. He thought about the note in the 1987 file. Instructed staff to cease contact. He thought about 63 years of $11 deposits and no withdrawals. He thought about a woman who had driven 94 miles on a Tuesday morning to ask a simple question, and who had sat in his chair and waited, without apparent anxiety, for a man she'd never met to realize who she was. He picked up his pen. He started writing the process document. The drainage repair on the East Field took 4 days, in the 2nd week of May. The contractor, Ruth Ann, used a man named Bill Tatum who'd worked on rural drainage infrastructure in Harlan County for 20 years and whose, quote, was fair and whose work was, in Ruth Ann's experience, Reliably done right the first time, brought a small excavator and 2 workers and dug up the collapsed pipe section, replaced it with a 40-foot run of new corrugated HDPE drainage pipe, backfilled and graded the surface, and was done by Thursday afternoon. Ruth Ann paid him from the farm's operating account, the amount that had seemed significant before the bank visit, not crippling, but significant enough that she'd been putting the repair off since February. Felt different now, not because the farm account had changed, but because she had changed her relationship to it. Because she knew now that the repair and the roof and the fence work on the north property line, and eventually a new truck, all of it existed within a framework of possibility that she hadn't fully internalized before seeing Preston Aldrich's face go still. She walked the repaired drainage line on Friday morning with Devin, who crouched down at the connection joints and tested the flow rate with a practiced eye. "That'll hold," he said. "It had better," Ruth Ann said. "It cost enough." Devin stood up and looked at the field. The spring planting was in soybeans, mostly this year, with a portion of the west field in corn. The rows were straight and clean, the soil dark and worked properly, the early growth beginning its patient work of becoming. "Can I ask you something?" Devin said. "You can ask. You've seemed different the last few weeks. Not bad different. Just different." Ruth Ann looked at the field. The morning light was coming in at the low angle that May mornings had, the kind that made everything look more three-dimensional than it would at noon, every plant and furrow casting its own shadow. "I went to the bank," she said. "Anything wrong?" "Nothing wrong," she said. "The opposite." She didn't say more than that. And Devin, who had learned in 3 years of working for her to take the information she gave and not push for more, nodded once and went back to checking the drainage joint. Gregory Huss had sent her a 40-page document 3 weeks after their meeting in Nashville. It was titled, in his spare way, Financial Plan R.A. Callaway, Draft 1. She'd read it at the kitchen table on a Sunday evening. With a cup of coffee and a yellow legal pad beside her 4 notes, she'd read it slowly, the way she read anything technical, pausing at terms she didn't know, looking them up, continuing, pausing again. It took her 4 hours. When she finished, she had 6 pages of notes and 17 questions. She emailed the questions to Gregory Huss's office on Monday morning. He responded within 24 hours, answering each one in sequence, referring her to specific pages in the document for clarification, flagging the places where her questions had identified genuine ambiguities that he would revise in Draft 2. She found this satisfying in a way that was hard to articulate. Not the money itself, or not only the money, but the experience of being engaged with as someone whose questions mattered, whose attention to detail was an asset rather than an inconvenience, whose understanding of her own situation was taken as the starting point rather than an obstacle to be managed. This was, she reflected, what the difference actually felt like. She drove into Lexington in the 3rd week of May to sign the accounts transfer paperwork at the attorney's office. It was a different firm than the one that had handled the will, a Louisville firm with a satellite office in Lexington that Gregory Huss had recommended. 2 attorneys who specialized in estate and asset management. The attorney who handled the signing was a woman named Carol Whitmore, early 50s, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the brisk, unimpressed efficiency of someone who processed substantial financial decisions as routine work. She walked Ruth Ann through the documents quickly and clearly, answered her questions, and did not ask unnecessary ones in return. The transfer was complete on a Thursday. Ruth Ann did not return to First Continental's Lexington branch. She received, 3 days after the transfer completed, a form letter from the bank thanking her for her years as a client and expressing hope for future opportunities to serve her needs. She filed it in the miscellaneous correspondence folder in the metal filing cabinet in the office, behind the desk with the desktop computer that ran Windows 7. Claire drove up from Nashville on the last weekend of May with her daughter Lily and her son James, 8 and 5, respectively. And the 4 of them had dinner on Friday night and spent Saturday at the farm, which the children treated as an environment of inexhaustible investigation, trailing after Devon through the barn and watching the tractor do things with quiet wonder and picking up interesting rocks from the gravel drive and placing them in their pockets with the seriousness of scientists. On Saturday evening, after the children were in bed in the guest room and Claire and Ruth Ann were sitting on the porch with the last of the light, Claire said, "Have you thought about what we talked about?" What she'd regret not doing. Ruth Ann looked at the yard light over the barn. "I've thought about it," she said. "And I told Gregory I want a portion set aside for the grandkids' education fund. Whatever they need." Claire was quiet for a moment. "Howard would have liked that," she said. "I think so." Ruth Ann took a sip of her coffee. "He didn't put money into the land because the land didn't need it. The kids need it. You're quoting his index card." "I'm extending it," Ruth Hahn said. Claire looked at her mother for a moment, at the windburn, the strong hands, the unhurried stillness that was both Howard Callaway's and entirely her own, and said nothing. There was nothing to add. In June, Ruth Ann got the roof replaced. She used a contractor from Harlan who'd been doing roof work in the county for 18 years, a man named Curtis Pruitt, whose father had done the original installation in 1989 and whose work came recommended by 2 of her neighbors without prompting. The job took 3 days. The new roof was a dark charcoal gray, which matched the tone of the original, at which Ruth Ann had chosen because it matched and for no other reason. She stood in the yard the afternoon the crew finished and looked up at it for a while. Dale had been meaning to replace it for 3 years before he died. He'd gotten quotes, discussed it, calculated it against the farm's operating budget, decided each year that it could wait 1 more year. The old roof had held through 6 more seasons after he died, but holding and being right were not the same thing, and she had known for years that it was past its useful life. She thought about Dale, standing in this same yard, looking up at the old roof, calculating. She thought about what he would say about the new one. He would have approved of the quality. He would have approved of the contractor. He would have said it was about time. He would not have understood fully the nature of what had made it possible. That was not a criticism. It was simply accurate. Dale's relationship to the account would have been the one his father had predicted. It would have gone into the land, another piece of equipment, an expansion, another acre brought back into production. Ruth Ann's relationship to it was different. She was not Howard. She would not put it away untouched for 63 years. But she shared with him a particular quality of vision that Dale, for all his virtues, had lacked. She could hold something good for the future without the present demanding it immediately. That was the index card. Really? That was what he'd meant. You held it together when it needed holding. On a Tuesday morning in early July, Ruth Ann drove into Harlan to have the crack in her windshield repaired. It was not the gesture toward the new truck she'd mentioned to Gregory Haas. That would come in its own time. But it was a thing she'd been putting off since January, and that she'd decided, sometime in the week since May, to stop putting off. The glass shop was on the main road through town, a family operation that had been there as long as Ruth Ann could remember. The man who ran it now, the son of the original owner, had fixed 2 windshields for her. Before, he did the repair in 40 minutes, while she sat in the waiting area drinking a paper cup of bad coffee and reading a months-old copy of a farm magazine. When it was done, he brought the truck around to the front and handed her the keys. "Good as new," he said. Ruth Ann looked at the windshield. Clear, clean, the repair line invisible from the driver's seat. "Thank you," she said. She drove home through the county roads she knew well enough to follow without thinking the particular curve before the bridge over Martin's Fork, the long, straight stretch with the Ridner family's cattle operation on the left and the old Hendricks place on the right, the final turn onto the gravel road that led to the farm gate. The morning was warm, the windows down. The air smelled of green things, cut grass from somewhere, the particular clean aftermath of the rain that had come through Tuesday night and settled by dawn. She pulled through the gate, parked the truck in its usual spot beside the barn. Devon was already in the east field, checking on the soybean rows. She could see him from where she stood, a small figure moving slowly along the length of the field, stopping periodically to crouch down and look at something, then moving on. She watched him for a moment. Then she went inside to make coffee, check the morning's paperwork, and plan the day's work. The account was where it was. The roof was new. The drainage was clear. The east field was growing. The morning light was doing what morning light did in July in Harlan County, which was to come in golden flat and honest, without apology, asking nothing except to be seen. Ruth Ann Calloway set the coffee on and looked out the kitchen window at all of it. She thought about Preston Aldridge's face, the specific moment, the precise second that the smile began its journey towards something else. And she let herself feel, quietly and without drama, the particular satisfaction of a person who has been underestimated so many times by so many people that she has learned to carry the correction not as triumph, but simply as fact. She had never needed him to understand. She had only needed the balance.